Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Deziel, and today I propose you to make the pattern for a cape just like this one. I'm going to do it starting from my coat block, so if you did yours you'll be able to use it. If not, you could go get mine that I just put in my boutique Etsy. In the coat block that I propose you, there is the back, the front piece, and two sets of sleeve. So you have the tailor sleeve and you have a normal sleeve depending on the style that you want to do. And the regular one is the one that I'll be using today. As you could see with all those line trace on my block, I use it for so many styles, tracing my construction line or my style line right on the block. Now for today's style, the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to decide the length that you want your cape to be. Now the block that I'm using is also with seam allowance, so remember when you take your measurement to take it from the seam line. And the cape that you saw at my presentation was 73 centimeters long at the center back. So the first thing to do will be to trace 90 degrees from the center back at the length that you want your cape to be. You don't really have to trace it, you could just engrave with your awl. Once you engrave, you could fold your pattern at the proper length. Then you're going to take your front, aligned at the side seam, and report the length, engrave it one more time. Now we're ready to trace the back all around. You don't need to indicate the dart since we don't need it. Now since the block has the seam allowance already included and we want to fuse the sleeve with the bodice or the coat, I'm going to ask you to trace the seam line of the top part of the armhole and a little bit of the shoulder. I don't know if you noticed, but when I do have a full sleeve like that, I always fold in the middle or the grain line so I could have half sleeve and a half sleeve. And that's what we're going to need right now. Now on the bodice, you're going to find the intersection of the top notch. You have double notch here, the top one. You find the intersection with the seam line, and you're going to do the same thing on the sleeve, intersection of the seam line. Then take your pattern awl, point the intersection, and place it right over the intersection of the bodice part. When it's in position, you're going to pivot the sleeve until the seam line at the sleeve head touch the seam line of the bodice. When it's in position, you could trace all around. Now when your sleeve is traced, I'm going to ask you to find the intersection of the seam line of the underarm seam and the armhole seam. Find your intersection, then you place your ruler 90 degrees from the middle of the sleeve, touching the underarm point, and you're going to trace your bicep line, elongate the line for about 5 millimeters. The next thing we'll do is continue the shoulder line until we meet that 5 millimeter out point. We're going to do it with a curved line, and the strongest part of the curve should be close to the armhole of the bodice. The next thing is going to be to place on your center line a little reference at the final length of your sleeve. Here I have a 5 centimeter hem, so 5 centimeters from the bottom. I just do a little reference. Then I'm going to connect this point with the 5 out that I have at the bicep line. Here I just want to point out that when I did trace my line, I went out a little bit so I could meet with my curved line and it's still nice and soft. So for the front, we'll use a 0.7 measurement instead of 0.5. Now the last thing to do for my back shoulder will be to add the seam allowance. I already have it on my bodice part, but all along the sleeve part. Now we have to trace the bottom of the cape, and you know it's going to be a curved shape. A big hem of 4 or 5 centimeters is going to be very difficult to fold in. So you have two choices, or you put just a seam allowance and you make an extra piece for a hem facing, or you reduce the amount of the hem and try with a 2.5 centimeter, and that's what I will do. So I did start by tracing my 2.5 parallel to the bodice part. Now I'm going to change it on the sleeve because now I have a big hem. Now what we have left to do is simply to connect both hem lines, the one for the bodice and the one from the sleeve, with a curve line. I suggest that you keep about half of the width of the bodice, that you keep 90 degrees. You will start curving pretty much here, and on the sleeve you keep it straight almost all the way. My back pattern is finished. It's going to be cut one time, unfold on the center back. So I'm just going to cut my pattern all around. For the front, we'll do pretty much the same thing. So you start by tracing all around using the right length. I already did it. And here again, you're going to trace the seam line on the armhole, the top part of the armhole, and a little bit of the shoulder. Same thing also for the sleeve. You're going to indicate the intersection of your notch and the seam line at the notch and at the sleeve edge. Then you're going to overlap the intersection point with the intersection point on your bodice. Then pivot your sleeve until the seam line touches the seam line on your bodice. When it's in position, we'll be able to trace, but you're going to have to do it in 2 steps because the front curve is a little bit inside. It is deeper than the back. So to be able to see your front, open the sleeve and trace those 3 sides, armhole, underarm seam, and the hem. Then you could fold it and trace the top part. Now again, like we did on the back, you're going to find the intersection of the underarm point. Then we're going to trace square from the top line, touching this point. And remember to come out about 7 millimeters. Now to trace the curve and the top part of the sleeve, since we already did it on the back and they're going to be sewn together, we could use the back plan that we have and just report the curve and the top line. To report the line on the front, you're going to go with your awl, point the 7 millimeter out that we did at the bicep line and just overlap with the one that we found on the front. Now at the bottom of the sleeve, just align the seam line with the seam line that we did for the middle of the sleeve, just like that. Then we'll be able to trace until the armhole. Now before to remove my back pattern, I wanted to show you the shoulder line. You might think that the pattern has a mistake here because the back shoulder is longer than the front, but the pattern is done like that. There is usually a 5 millimeter ease on the back shoulder, and to distribute it, make sure we don't stretch it out all the way down. We will place a notch at the bicep line level on back and front. So the ease will be distributed over here. Now before to do the bottom curve, I'm going to ask you to do a little modification on the length of the front, because usually the bust make the front part go a little higher than the back. So to correct the length and have it the same level back and front, I'm going to ask you to add a 1 centimeter more or less at the center front. So you notice that I trace my 1 centimeter until pretty much the half of the bodice. And I'm going to add now my 2.5 centimeter in the same area. Now you could trace from the front hem to the sleeve hem by eyes, or just use the curve that you did for your back pattern and report it on the front. Now I'm just going to cut my pattern. If you use my code block, you might have noticed that there is a notch at the neck and 1 notch at the bottom. This is for the center front, and after center front, the block has a 3 centimeter overlap and a 1 centimeter seam allowance. That for sure could be changed depending on your style. So the front pattern is not unfold, it's going to be cut 2 times. Now I did a dotted line, this is my center front. For the finishing of the front, you could do a facing, And remember to calculate your 5 centimeter from the center front. So if I'm adding a 5 centimeter, it's going to be like that. And the facing is from that 5 centimeter all the way to the end of the front pattern. So I trace my facing, and at the shoulder, if I want a 5 centimeter facing, I'm going to measure on the seam line 6 centimeter since I already have my seam allowance. I did trace parallel my 6 centimeter for a little distance. Then I'm going to connect that line with the bottom one I did with a soft curve. Here I wanted to show you the cape that I was wearing at the introduction, because since we did the minimum angle, so we don't have too much fabric hanging at the bottom, we have the minimum width to be able to move a bit. You're going to need an opening for your ends for sure. You could find the area of the opening by doing a first prototype and trying different area until you find the right place. But since I already did it, I'm going to give you my measurement. Now the easiest way that I found to show you where to place your opening for your ends is just like that. Fold your pattern, that's the front pattern, just fold it and place the top of the sleeve parallel with the center front, just like that, and then fold. Now you could trace a straight line from the bottom to about the underarm point of the sleeve. Then for the one that I present you, I use my French curve to trace the top part with a very soft line. Now for the height and the length of this opening, I'm going to give you the measurement from the neck because it's a reference that's going to be similar for all of us. So from the neckline, the opening for the hand is starting at about 31 centimeter. And the length of the opening for this one that I show you is about 22 centimeter. Now the new pattern is going to be in 2 pieces, so you have to retrace your 2 pieces. And of course put seam allowance on both pieces on the line where you cut. And for this one again, what I did is I put a 2 centimeter seam allowance on both sides so I could fold and have like a wide facing inside that I hold with a top stitch. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching and I see you next time.